From the choreographer of the critically acclaimed Frankenstein, the Joffrey Ballet presents the U.S. premiere of Liam Scarlett's Carmen, a breathtaking ballet filled with desire, passion, and betrayal. This adaptation of the famous opera pulsates with life and reveals the timeless tale of a woman who dares to live on her own terms. See the Joffrey Ballet's Carmen, September 18th through the 28th at Lyric Opera House. Tickets available at joffrey.org. Steppenwolf Theater presents the Chicago premiere of Mr. Wolf. 12 years ago, Teresa was stolen from her parents. Now a precocious 15-year-old, she's been rescued and returned to a family she neither recognizes nor understands. This miraculous reunion sets the stage for the existential question, what nightmares are we willing to face for the sake of our children? Mr. Wolf begins September 11th, kicking off Steppenwolf's milestone 50th anniversary season. Tickets are available now at steppenwolf.org. Today on CityCast Chicago, after a summer of beach days, maybe some of us take Lake Michigan for granted a little bit. But a new report shows the rise of AI and data centers threaten the Great Lakes' long-term stability. It's Monday, September 8th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Helena Volzer is the Senior Source Water Policy Manager for the Alliance for the Great Lakes. Helena, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Thanks so much for having me.
We appreciate you making time. Let's start with the Great Lakes as a resource. To be real, I'm not sure I've always appreciated the scale here. Just how important is this ecosystem to our basic ability to have fresh drinking water?
Yeah, the Great Lakes are, one of the world's largest sources of precious, fresh, clean, natural waters. They service millions of people every day for their drinking water. Vast ecosystems rely on the Great Lakes region. Tourism industry, fishing industry, all of that. It's all happening on the Great Lakes. So it's an important resource for this region. It's been part of historically why this region was an industrial powerhouse. And again, it provides drinking water to millions of people.
Anytime I am standing out on Lake Michigan, I feel the same way when I am standing near an ocean, right? I can't see the other side. I can't quantify how much water I'm looking at. And so the idea of working and looking at the quantity of the Great Lakes, how do you measure something like that? How do you measure, year on year, how much maybe water we're using or losing?
Yeah. So one of the things the Great Lake Compact does it's an agreement among the 8 Great Lakes states. There's an agreement makes it applicable to the Canadian provinces as well, and it prohibits the diversion of water, that is transferring water outside the Great Lakes region. And as part of that agreement, it also requires states to manage their in-basin water usage, right? And there was a recognition, right, that this is a precious resource that requires management to ensure that it's available for future generations. Only 1% of the waters in the Great Lakes is replenished each year from rainfall and snowmelt and inflows from groundwater. And there's also a connection between groundwater and the Great Lakes that folks don't often think of. In fact, between 40 and 75% of Great Lakes state residents get their drinking water from groundwater. So there's this connection, and the Great Lakes Compact actually recognizes that it's an interconnected resource, both groundwater and surface water.
Now, it's a good reminder that there are 8 states, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin that border the Great Lakes. So your new report looks at increasing demands on our water supply. What are the biggest threats here?
We're seeing, increasing demand for water, and we focused on 3 sectors that we view as sort of simultaneously converging on this region and all water intensive sectors. So irrigated agriculture is one, data centers and other large tech manufacturing like semiconductor chips and quantum computing, and then critical minerals mining are the 3 sectors we kind of looked at. And one of the things we found, in meeting with environmental organizations and economic development corps is that water wasn't really holistically being considered in some economic development decision making. And so that kind of prompted our interest in this subject matter. And the report focuses heavily kind of on this tech sector because we see a really increase in demand from that sector in particular to meet the growing needs of generative AI in particular.
We talk so much about our growing need for energy, and at least from my perspective, it feels like rarely is the urgency about like the relationship to energy and water use is that really highlighted. You know, when you mention these three sectors, the one that jumps out to me, increased irrigation for agriculture, like I can immediately make sense of that. Okay. More water use to water crops. But when you say mineral mining and then data centers, what type of water use are we talking about there?
Yeah, so I'll start with data centers. That's the one everyone's really interested in right now. But data centers use water for cooling inside the data center. So the generative AI that I talked about requires really vast computing power, and when that is happening inside of a data center, and the server racks get really hot, and so that needs to be cooled, and the most common method for that right now is something called evaporative cooling, where water is pushed through a membrane. It brings down the temperature in the entire room, and then more than half of that water is evaporated off. Whatever isn't evaporated off can either be recirculated in the data center or gets discharged as wastewater. At the hyperscale level, when we're talking about these data centers that can sustain AI, there's no hard and fast definition of what a hyperscale data center really is, but what I've found is that they can use between 1 and 5 million gallons per day. And again, more than half of that's evaporating off and lost essentially when they're using that method. So to put that in a little bit in perspective, 1 million gallons per day for a year, that's 365 million gallons. That's the equivalent of what 12,000 Americans are using in a year. So, but unlike those Americans, right, that water is consumptive use. It's being evaporated off. It's not returned to the watershed. And so that's where, we have some concern about the use of that water. With respect to critical minerals mining, I think this is something that will be a much longer term and slower industry to see come online with respect to water use. But it's a very water intensive industry when you're mining for minerals like copper and nickel that are needed both to, for green energy purposes, but also inside of data centers when equipment needs to be replaced. So there are some mines in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota that we highlight in the report. During mining process, water is pumped out, groundwater is pumped out, and then it's also used in processing, and in that process becomes contaminated and can't be used again. So there's a high consumptive use associated with mining as well.
Is there like a working relationship between these different industries and then like our basic consumption of water? Like this much is going to be used for this, or this much is, or is it just like a free for all and you get as much as you can get your hands on? And ultimately, does that mean less drinking water for the rest of us, like less water for dishes and the shower and all the other ways we use water day to day?
So for data centers, they could withdraw water in one of two ways. They could drill their own well and withdraw water from a surface water source, or they could pull water from a municipal public water system like you and I do by connecting to the municipal system. And 97% of data center operators are doing that, connecting to a municipal system. When they do that, it's the obligation of the public water system to report on its water use, not the data center. So the data center has no water use reporting requirements.
They just pay their water bill and keep it pushing.
Yeah, so there's not a look beyond, this is the capacity of what the water system can sustain in terms of that water use. But the way that the data centers are using water is consumptive, as I've just talked about. But then on the other side, if they are drilling their own well and are withdrawing groundwater, that depending on how much may be subject to permitting requirements. Also, depending on which state you're talking about, those thresholds vary throughout the Great Lakes region. And then on top of that, you have non-disclosure agreements that are being used during the siting process for these facilities. So how much water is even proposed to be used is not known sometimes at the outset, by the public at least. And so, that makes predicting demand, as you could probably tell, very difficult if you don't know how much or what the water footprint is of these kinds of facilities. And so I think that's a big challenge for regulators, and that's why one of our solutions in the report is states should be taking a look at whether or not we need to have reporting requirements and public disclosure requirements around how much water and energy these facilities are using.
For some reason, when people are talking about them, I picture them out in rural communities, but to be learning how many are popping up and proliferating in and around the city, is a lesson learned for me. Turns out Illinois is fourth in the nation in terms of number of data centers, with many communities continuing to court that kind of business. Not to sound silly here, but like, is the biggest threat, water will be more expensive for us, or is there a chance that like if we leave these factors unchecked, we're talking about like literally draining the Great Lakes of its water? Or is that something that's, not entirely possible?
Yeah, look, I don't think I have a perfect answer to this question. So we're not going to drain the Great Lakes tomorrow with one data center, right? But the report's focus is that it's the convergence of all of these different industries, of all of these data centers coming to the region, all simultaneously needing water. And why there's such a heavy emphasis on groundwater in the report and is because I think that will be where we see these conflicts crop up first. The one example that I've discussed in the report is in west of South Bend, Indiana. There's an EV battery plant and a data center, and during the dewatering process, the construction to make way for those facilities, residents' wells are suspected to have gone dry. And so, without more regional planning and studying where water is available and where it's not, and then making siting decisions based on that, we may begin to see more of those types of conflicts.
If you're looking for a new career, I want you to pause for a second. What exactly are you looking for? Maybe it's something that's flexible, that works on your time, something where you can use those people skills, your creativity to work with and connect others. Something where you can make an impact. If the answer is yes, then maybe you should consider real estate. Realtors not only help people buy and sell homes, but navigate Chicago's rental market. They help people find the next great location to realize the small business dreams, which means you can help people find stability, put down roots, grow something in their neighborhoods. Plus, you get to set your own schedule, choose who you work with, explore different parts of the city. So if real estate is for you, here's how to get started. Visit realtorsrealestateschool.com today to schedule your free career consultation. That's realtorsrealestateschool.com. September is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, and kidney cancer is one of the most common types of childhood cancer. The Kidney Cancer Association is committed to creating awareness and raising funds for research to find a cure through Chalk Your Walk. Basically, you chalk some art on the pavement, maybe in your driveway or on the sidewalk outside your apartment. Include chalkyourwalk.org on your drawing, then post photos of your art on social media and tag Kidney Cancer Association. Seriously, you can draw anything, something that brings you joy or an encouraging message, and just tag Kidney Cancer Association. Learn more or donate directly at chalkyourwalk.org. Look, I know we all enjoying this mild September weather, and I know you don't want to talk about it, but winter is coming. So if you're tired of putting plastic up on your windows every single year, then maybe you should think about getting them replaced. Window Nation has some of the best replacement windows out there. Top quality, energy efficient, and all at a reasonable price. With a lifetime warranty on all the windows, Window Nation can help keep your home protected far beyond the next season. So this time next year, you can rest easy knowing your windows are one less thing to worry about. And if you buy now, you can save big, because if you buy 2 windows, you gonna get 2 for free. But you better hurry. This sale ends September 30th. Schedule a fast free estimate now with the pros at Window Nation. Call 866-90-NATION or head to windownation.com. Do we have a sense of which communities are most likely to feel the effects of water depletion first? I know Joliet is paying a boatload of money for Chicago to divert some water to them. There are suburban communities already struggling. Do we know where in Chicago, Cook County, people will be most impacted, and how soon are we talking?
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned Joliet. So, when I talked about the compact, Chicago, Illinois has a sort of an exception from the compact in that it operates under a Supreme Court decree where it can use Lake Michigan water up to a certain threshold. And so Joliet has this deal with Chicago to purchase water. And then there's some additional communities near Joliet that are also looking to become part of that agreement and tap into Lake Michigan water. And so, in one of them, Minooka, for example, I know there's a data center proposal there. And so the question is, what are the conservation and efficiency standards that that are going to be applied there because it's not necessarily subject to the compact. So it's a little bit unique exception there for Illinois. In terms of which communities will be most impacted, I think that's a really great question. When I look at a map of the data centers that exist today, they're clustered around the metropolitan areas, and that's primarily because of the access to electricity, the transmission lines, and then fiber optic internet latency. So that's where we're starting to see it first. But I do think these are vast, large facilities that require a lot of land. We talked a little bit about the energy connection with data centers, and I think a lot of the focus has been on the electricity needs of data centers, right? But there's a connection to electricity with data centers and water in that if you use a cooling method in a data center that uses more electricity but is more conserving of water, when that electricity is being generated by fossil fuels or nuclear, you still have that consumptive use of water going on. It's just happening at the power plant. So, there are multiple ways that data centers use water, directly for cooling, but then the indirect needs of how much water a data center needs also at the power plant as well.
What is the timeline for these issues? Is this a scale of generations or sooner? Like, how urgent should lawmakers be thinking about, prioritizing how water is being divvied up and used?
Yeah, the time for regional demand studies is now. It's yesterday, in some cases. And states like Ohio and Illinois and Indiana are undertaking those types of studies. And it looks at this issue of where water is available and where it's not, and then tries to make predictions also with population growth as to where there will be gaps in capacity, both in water and in wastewater. The other thing is, like, these studies, it's great to do a study, but it's not really helpful unless it's actually used. And so the economic development corps and local governments really need to be turning to these studies when they're deciding where to locate a data center, and where it makes the most sense to do that based on where water resources are.
Illinois did introduce legislation in the spring to require more reporting from companies and enact fines for noncompliance. It didn't go anywhere, but we'll see if they take it back up and if they give it some real teeth. How have lawmakers responded to this report?
That really remains to be seen. I'm hopeful that they will take up some of the solutions that we've proposed in the report. I talked about the Great Lakes Compact before. That's something that this region, the Great Lakes region, has. As I view it as an advantage that other regions like Virginia, that's number one in data centers, or California doesn't really have this agreement for collaboration and for managing water use to serve as a foundational layer. And our report suggests go beyond, the strict limits of the compact and look at your state implementing law and see, what ways you can improve that to be ready for this influx of demand. Every state in the Great Lakes region has also enacted some kind of sales tax and use incentive for data centers to locate here. So over the last 20 years, that's been the case, and states have renewed them. And I think there's a question, when it comes to managing public resources, are those incentives necessary, right? And another thing I looked at in the report, for local governments that are offering, incentives or abatements, involve, some kind of community benefit agreement. And a community benefit agreement can bring benefits back to the community in terms of wages or things like that, other things the community would want to see. But also it could provide for some of these conservation and efficiency standards that we talked about, requiring the data center to use more water conservation methods or provide some other water resources benefit back to the community.
Worst case scenario, this goes unchecked. What's the worst case scenario if Great Lakes states don't take this seriously?
So if those needs of water resources aren't balanced, right, I think where we're going to see that crop up first is going to be these groundwater conflicts. And you're right to say, what happens if it goes unchecked? I think that's why we're calling for states to act now, before we become a water stressed area like Arizona, like out west, where they've not planned for that water resource use. And so, turning to those regional demand studies, getting it going now to be proactive to ensure that we have these water resources available for future generations. One of the studies I cited in the report talks about how Great Lakes cities like Detroit, Chicago, Indianapolis, Columbus, although it's outside the Great Lakes, are all sinking at a rate of 2 millimeters or more per year. They're subsiding due to groundwater, over extraction of groundwater. And so to some extent, this is already occurring, right? Groundwater resources, if they're not being considered holistically as well as the Great Lakes, there may be more pressure then after groundwater resources, then what's next? It puts more pressure on the communities that sort of straddle the Great Lakes Basin line, perhaps to ask for a diversion. And so that's the kind of thing we would like to see avoided, and preserve our Great Lakes for future generations.
Maybe this is outside of the scope of your reporting, but you mentioned a few states that are dealing with the impacts of being water stressed. What does it look like when a city or a state is under that type of pressure?
Yeah. So I'm a Great Lakes expert, not an expert on out west, but some places have had infrastructure issues. I think in Arizona they've experienced that due to overextraction of groundwater, and then you start setting stricter conservation limits for just the public's use, so that can show up in sprinkler restrictions or other things like that. There are some cities in the Great Lakes states that do implement sprinkler restrictions in the summertime during those hot, dry summer months, which we may see more of because of climate change. And so, it starts to trickle down like that. And then, you have impacts. Can you sustain your businesses and the folks that live there? And that's really a question for those areas to grapple with.
I mean, for someone listening to this who's like, well, I can't control if they bring yet another data center to the area, what would your advice to them be? Because in some respects, it feels like these are going to pop up in our neighborhoods and our communities. And now it's really just about like how little damage can we ask of them as possible versus, trying to protest them coming at all.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, right? And to some extent, citing where water resources are available in lower stress water areas, it seems like a logical choice, right? And that's why we're encouraging the use of regional demand studies to inform that siting. If local folks are interested in getting involved, I think the first thing they can do is read our report at greatlakes.org and share it with their local elected officials and state officials, and get folks to care about this issue. The other thing is, you're right. Oftentimes, local folks don't know about a data center proposal until there's some kind of zoning decision that needs to be made. So I think paying attention to what's going on at the local level is really important. So you can find the report at greatlakes.org and subscribe to see how the Alliance is working on water quantity issues. And in addition to those issues, we also work on things like reducing harmful algal blooms, stopping invasive species, fighting plastic pollution, and providing access to clean, affordable drinking water. And we also have a volunteer Adopt a Beach program that operates on every lake in the region. And you can sign up for that and learn more about our work at greatlakes.org. So I just want to mention that.
Helena, I really appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago. Please, you all check our show notes to read this entire report. Helena, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Some good news. A new 5-day Chicago Music Festival is kicking off this week. Sound and Gravity will include 50 plus artists across 7 different venues. And here's the catch. They all within about a mile of each other, like Gill Road, Constellation, Beat Kitchen, and others. For full details and a schedule, check the show notes. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.